Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Lillian Chugura with Lily Legal, and today we are going to be talking about domestic violence and who it affects, how it affects them, and the immigration benefits. That can be applied for someone that has been a victim of domestic violence. So that's what we're going to be talking about. We're also going to be talking about the immigration consequences for someone that is the perpetrator of the abuse. Okay, so not only are we going to be talking about the people that could potentially, the abuse that could potentially get benefits, immigration benefits, we're also going to be talking about the consequences to the abuser, because there are some immigration consequences depending on their immigration status. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So feel free to ask questions. And if you are watching this on the replay, please feel free to ask your questions. I will be responding as they come in. I will be responding. So feel free, even if you're watching this like a month from now, feel free to leave your comments because I will respond to you. Okay. And I just want to mention that, what I do with my firm, we are an immigration law firm. We help individuals that are either seeking to get status or seeking to bring their family to the US to join them. So that's what we do here. I help my clients stabilize their status and reunify with their families. So if you feel that this applies to you, or you would want to schedule a consultation with me, feel free to give us a call. Our number is on the screen. So feel free to do that. And we're just going to get right into this. There's so much to cover and there's so much to talk about, but I really want to start with talking to you guys about the reason that I am having this particular live, the reason that I chose this as the topic for today, because that really frames this conversation for us. So if I know that a lot of my followers are Africans, and if you are African in the US, and even outside of the US, you know about the story of the pastor that unfortunately killed his wife, and there have been history of domestic violence in that family, and it ultimately ended in the spouse losing her life. And that sparked me to do this topic because I want us to have this conversation. I want us to give options to people. I know that some of you work with victims of domestic violence, and I want to make sure that this is out there and you know what you can offer to your to people, options that can potentially help them get away from an abuser. And I also want to talk about the consequences, the immigration consequences that can happen to an abuser if they continue with that, or if they are a green card holder or don't have status in the US. They are very severe consequences that could potentially include deportation. So that's why we're talking about this. I want to basically give options to people. And that's the purpose of this live, is to give people out there that might be in a similar situation to the lady that was killed, or that might just not even know or understand the different levels of abuse. We really, I really want to give you the information and the options. And something I also want to put out there, October, if you guys don't know, is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So what I'm going to be doing in my firm is offering a free consultation for people that fit into this category for the whole month of October. However, you would have to book your appointments in order to take advantage of this, and mention this video just so I know, just so we can keep track of all the appointments. So please feel free to give us a call or schedule through our website so that you can, or someone you know, can take advantage of this free consultation for the month of October for victims of domestic violence. Okay. So we are going to get right into, now we're going to get right into the what options are available to someone that might be suffering from, might be in an abusive relationship with a US citizen or a permanent resident. So that's the first option we're going to talk about because that gives you a lot of options as far as getting status, getting a green card, work authorization. That's really what gives people freedom from these types of relationships, is having options. So that's what I want to provide today. So the first thing that makes it possible for someone to apply for status in the US is the Violence Against Women's Act. So this act, even though it has women in the title, it does not actually only apply to women. This applies to men as well. So men that are in an abusive relationship, men that are victims of domestic violence, can use this act in order to gain status in the US, get a work authorization, and get a green card, and eventually become a citizen of the United States. So I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page. Even though it has women on the title of this act, it does not mean it only applies to women. It applies to men and women. So to be able to apply for status under this act, you have to be a spouse, parent, or an unmarried child under 21 of a US citizen. So those are the first group of people that can apply: parents, spouses, and unmarried children under 21. Unfortunately, under immigration law, once a child gets married, they are no longer considered a child. So if the child is under 21 but married, this wouldn't apply to them. It also applies to spouses and children of lawful permanent residents. So this is important. This applies to both US citizens and permanent resident spouses. So if you are the parent of a US citizen, you can apply under this act because of any type of abuse or violence that you have faced with your child. So, and when we say abuse, I think that's one of the key words that throws people off and makes them think that they wouldn't qualify under this. When we say abuse, we don't mean physical violence. It doesn't always mean physical violence, okay? It can be emotional. It can be manipulation by the person. So it can take very different forms. So I just want to give you guys some examples of what types of abuse this includes. So it can include verbal abuse, exploitation, emotional abuse. Like I said, intimidation is a big one that we see a lot in the immigrant community. And then there's also threats to take away your children or have you deported. Okay, that is not allowed. You cannot threaten someone just because you're having a disagreement that you're going to have them deported, especially if they are your spouse. That's a form of intimidation. That's a form of coercion to keep them in that relationship. So therefore, something like that, if you are experiencing that in a relationship, can be a basis, and if we can document it, can be a basis for you to apply under VAWA in order to gain status in the US. So I really want people to understand that there is different types of abuse and there's different levels of abuse, right? So it doesn't have to be a physical violence, right? It doesn't have to be physical abuse in order for you to be able to gain status under VAWA. So I always have to push this because I've had people come to me and they do not understand that there are levels to abuse, right? And another thing that's not on here is financial abuse, right? When you have to basically run everything by your partner in a forceful manner, you don't have access to your accounts, you're basically getting a stipend for what you need at a certain time. People don't consider those abuse, but if you look under what actually counts as abuse, that is in there. Now, because of social media and the fact that we all have cell phones, another form of abuse that we're seeing that is a growing thing is digital abuse. So this is when a partner does not allow the other one to, you know, check social media or even have a social media account. They're always checking your phone, your text messages. They don't allow you to talk to certain people. Those types of things are now being considered part of abuse because if it's happening in real life. So if your partner is not allowing you to, let's say, hang out with your friends, your family, in a digital sense, keeping you from calling your family, keeping you from calling your friends, connecting with people on social media, that is the equivalent of it in a digital world. So it does count as abuse, and those things can lead to someone being able to get status under the Violence Against Women's Act. So again, this applies to spouses, parents, and unmarried children under 21 of US citizens. So if you are a parent of a US citizen, you can apply for this. If you are a spouse of a US citizen, you can apply for this. If you are a spouse or a child of a permanent resident, you can apply for this. So I really want to make it clear to people that there are, even though it says Violence Against Women's Act, this applies to a group of people, not just women. Okay, men that are in abusive relationships that are victims of abuse also can apply under this act and be able to gain status in the US. So this is very important. I want people to understand how the different levels of abuse that you can get a status through and how the US government views those abuse, right? There's different levels of it, but if we can document it, we can get you on the path to potentially becoming a US citizen. So let's really try to help people that are in these relationships that they are able to gain status. And the main thing to really know about this is that even though you might still be married to your abuser that you're filing VAWA because of, you can still file, right? VAWA requires the US government to basically keep your application a secret from your spouse, from your parent, from your child, right? Your spouse cannot call USCIS and find out that you filed for VAWA. It's illegal for USCIS to tell your spouse or your parent or your child that you have filed for VAWA. Only you and your attorney are the only ones that are able to get information about your application. So it is really important that people keep that in mind. This is not just, this does not require the US citizen or the permanent resident to have any role in the application. They do not get to, there's no interview that they have to attend. And that's another form of abuse that happens all the time. And we do not discuss it as immigrants, where in a family unit, if one spouse has status and they file for the other spouse, guess what happens? If they start having issues, or if one spouse becomes abusive, the US citizen or permanent resident spouse becomes abusive, they withhold immigration benefits for their spouse. They refuse to file the application. They refuse to go to the interview that would then lead to their spouse gaining permanent residency and being able to eventually become a citizen. So these are all levels of abuse that we can work with you on in order to gain status in the US. So what do you actually have to show in order to get this? You have to prove that you are in a relationship, either a parent-child relationship, a spousal relationship. That's really what you have to show in order to be able to apply for VAWA. So you have to be able to not only prove your relationship with the person, you have to also show that the person is a US citizen or a permanent resident. Typically, if you are in, there are certain abusive relationships where the spouse that's not a US citizen is not able to prove, right? They don't have the documentation because their spouse has kept it from them. There are ways for us as your attorneys to find out and basically force USCIS to find out, because they know if your spouse is a US citizen or not. So there's ways for us to do this where you do not have to get this information from your spouse. We do not want you to put yourself in deeper problems, right? We want you to stay safe. So if you do not have this information of whether the person is a US citizen or a permanent resident readily available to you, I will not ask you to go find it, because I do not want you to basically spark any further abuse from the person that's abusing you. So even though the requirement is to show that the person is a US citizen or permanent resident, there is a way for us to get around that by basically making USCIS do it for us. Okay? So the second, like I said, you have to show that you have that relationship. That's the first requirement. The second requirement is if you are filing because you were abused by a spouse, you have to show that the abuse happened during the marriage and that the marriage is still valid. So this does not mean, or it was terminated less than 2 years prior to self-petitioning. So what this means basically is you do not have to stay married to the person in order to qualify for VAWA. And that's something I really want people to know, is that even if you file for this, you are allowed to stay in the marriage if that's what's safest for you at the moment. You're also allowed to leave the marriage if that's what's safest for you. So this is really an individual decision of whether to get a divorce or not, or stay in the marriage. So most of the time what I find is that if someone stays in the marriage, once they are able to get a permanent residency, they feel more confident. They feel more able to basically move forward and get a divorce or leave their partner that's abusing them. So that's something to keep in mind. If you are in, if you're filing because you're being abused by a spouse, you should know that you have to show that it happened during the marriage and that you're still, it's either you're still married or your divorce was less than 2 years. Then the third one is that you have to show that the abuse happened in the United States and that you, the victim, must have lived with the abuser. So unfortunately, this is where this really applies to people that are living in the United States. So if you are in the United States and you live with your US citizen or permanent resident spouse or parent or child. So those are the 3 ways you can get it. If you live with your US citizen spouse, US citizen child, or US citizen parent, and the abuse happened in the United States, you can apply for this. However, if you have never been to the United States and your spouse abused you outside of the US, unfortunately, this does not extend to you. If, however, you came to the US for a visit while your spouse was a US citizen or a permanent resident, and the abuse occurred while you were physically in the US, even if you leave once your stay period is over, you can still apply for this. So there's different ways to apply for it, but the abuse has to happen in the US. So if you've never been to the US or you've never lived with your abuser, then this would not apply to you. And then the last requirement is that the person that's applying for this benefit has to show that they have good moral character. So basically, it says good moral character, but what they're really looking at is if the person has a criminal history. So the background checks has to come out clean. And if it doesn't, right? If there's something in your history that you were arrested or charged with a crime, anything like that, that's when you that's when you have to bring those things up with your attorney so that we know the best way to help you. It doesn't mean that automatically if you've been charged with a crime or if you've ever been arrested that you wouldn't qualify. It's not an automatic thing. So it's really important that you bring it up with your attorney so that we know the best way to help you. Okay, so just to recap where we are so far, and I just want to mention, feel free to ask me questions. Your questions can be about VAWA, it can be about anything else immigration related. But while I'm waiting for your questions, I will be talking about domestic violence and immigration law, how they intersect, and how someone that has been in a domestic violence relationship or situation can gain status in the US. And later on, I'll be talking about how the abuser could potentially lose their status in the US or not be able to gain status in the US. So these are things that I will be covering. So if you do have questions about anything I've covered so far, please feel free to ask. That's what I'm here for. I know I'm here to give you information, but I'm also here to answer your questions because I know you have to have questions. But if you don't, that means I'm doing a great job explaining this. So that's also, I guess, a good thing on that end. But please feel free to put your questions in the comments because I'm here to answer them. Okay. So I just want to go over the types of abuse again because I want us to know what counts as abuse. So physical violence, yes, that counts as abuse. But there's a lot of other things that fits within that framework. So I really want us to not just focus on whether the person has hit you. That's not the only form of abuse that counts under the Violence Against Women's Act. There's other forms of abuse that fits under this. So I really want us to move away from the thought that if the person hasn't physically harmed you, that it's not really abuse. We don't want it to get to the level where there's physical abuse. So please feel free to ask me questions. And I'll just put up the types of abuse up on the screen again. So there's physical abuse, there's violent acts, or threats of violence. So maybe they didn't hit you, but they threatened to hit you, right? There's verbal abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's basically your partner intimidating you, degrading you, there's economic abuse. So this is where your partner withholds your funds. I've had situations where the partner will have you put your paycheck into a certain account and then just give you weekly stipends, right? So those count as economic abuse as well. And then the big one that I know when you're dealing with someone that is an abuser or a perpetrator of domestic violence and you are not a US citizen, you don't have status in the US, this is something that they will default to in certain arguments. And there's been cases where this was enough for someone to be able to gain status under VAWA. So coercion or threats to take away children or have you deported, right? So they would either so the way that usually presents is, well, if you call the police because I hit you, well, I'll just have you deported and I'll take away your kids because you can't leave with the kids, right? So then that leads to people not reporting the violence that they are experiencing in their relationship and not getting restraining orders and all those things. But I just want to, like I said at the beginning, the reason I'm doing this live is to give people options and let immigrants that are not in status, that are in abusive relationships, know that they have options, right? Even if your partner has filed for you and is still in process, but you fit under this, this is a way for you to gain status outside of that partner. Right? Because what usually happens is if your partner has started the process and you have a big fight, or they feel that if you gain the status, you will leave or you would have, independence from them, that could lead to them not showing up to the interview. And if they don't show up to the interview, you're basically stuck with an application without a petitioner. But with the VAWA, you are able to file without them. They do not have any part in the application process. They do not have to give you any documentation. They do not have to show up to the interview. This is all you. So I really want people to understand what this is and how it can really help someone that is in an abusive relationship or someone that is a victim of domestic violence. So, like I mentioned before, this, most of the time people also feel that you have to have a police report of the abuse or you have to have, a restraining order in order to apply for this. No, you do not. The US government does not require you to file a police report to get a restraining order in order for you to prove that you were abused. That is not what they're looking for, right? They're looking for you to be able to show that you were, in fact, in this relationship that caused you to be abused, right? That's what they're looking for. They're not looking for you to file a police report or a restraining order, because those are things for people that work with victims of domestic violence. You know that when the victims file a police report, it causes the perpetrator to even be more enraged. If the victim leaves, right, that's another reason they do not require the victim to leave the relationship in order to apply for VAWA. Because we know if you work with domestic violence victims, if the victim threatens to leave or does leave, that could lead to deadly consequences, because that could trigger the abuser to go further, to become more violent. So those are two things that you do not need to do. You do not need to file for divorce. You do not need to file a police report in order to qualify under this. So If you are just joining us, we are talking about domestic violence and immigration law. So we're talking about how a victim of domestic violence, whether it's from a spouse, a parent, or a child, is able to gain status in the US without the perpetrator's involvement. And this means you are not only getting a work authorization, you're getting a green card at the end of the process. And if you get your green card, you can become a citizen at the end of the process. So that's what we are really, that's what we are talking about today. We want to give people the ability to leave certain relationships that are not healthy for them. And most of the time, if the person is not someone in the US with status, if this person is already out of status, this is something that could force them to remain in a relationship that's abusive. But with the Violence Against Women's Act, we want to give people the ability to leave violent relationship and be able to move forward and become citizens at the end of the entire process. That's what we are really talking about today, and just giving people that information and the confidence to move forward in their immigration journey without their abuser. Now, I do want to mention again that because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, I will be doing free consultations for victims of domestic violence. I want to know if they qualify for any benefits. I will be doing those throughout the month of October. So please feel free to call the office and schedule the consultation. So that is, and please share with your community, because I really want people to take advantage of this and know that we are here for them in whatever capacity they feel comfortable moving forward in. So again, free consultations for the month of October for victims of domestic violence. Because like I said before, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So now I just want to go over certain consequences to abusers. So we've talked about how a victim of domestic violence can gain status through the Violence Against Women's Act if the perpetrator is a US citizen or a permanent resident. And before I move on to the consequences to the abuser, I do want to also mention that if the perpetrator is not a US citizen or a permanent resident, so if it's two undocumented people in an abusive relationship, right, there's the option of basically filing for a different form of relief for the person that's being abused, as long as they go through, but that process requires you to actually file some sort of report, help with prosecution of the person. But again, if you do not fit into the married to a US citizen or permanent resident, then we can always explore those other options. But I really want you guys to know that there are options out there. And even if this does not apply to you specifically, it could apply to someone in your community. So I do want you to share this, and basically let's get as many people empowered as possible. Okay. So now let's talk about consequences to the abuser. So if the abuser is not a US citizen, right? If they are a permanent resident that's going to be applying for citizenship, and the victim has filed a police report or has filed charges against them, has filed a restraining order, all those things will have to be disclosed on their application for citizenship. And for citizenship, you have to show good moral character. And having a restraining order or having a charge of domestic violence on your record is not really showing good moral character. So that would lead to you not being able to be approved for citizenship. Now, If you are still in the process of applying to get status, and you are abusing your spouse, and that gets, again, files a police report, you're prosecuted, or there's a restraining order, all those things again will count against you because it will show up on the background check that the US government does every time you go for your interview. So those are things to keep in mind. If you are a permanent resident and you violate a restraining order. So having a restraining order against you by itself does not lead to you technically being removed from the US or being put in immigration court to be removed from the US. However, if you violate the restraining order, that alone is enough for you to be put in immigration court to be removed from the US. So just to repeat, having the restraining order by itself without any charges in criminal court for domestic violence, or without having any conviction in criminal court for domestic violence, does not lead to you being removed or removable from the US, right? But when you violate the restraining order, you are now automatically removable from the US. It doesn't matter how long you've been in the US, and it doesn't matter how long you've had your green card. Domestic violence convictions and violations of restraining orders automatically turns into potential removal proceedings against you to basically have you deported from the US. So these are the consequences to people that abuse their. This can be applied to people, spouses, parents, and children. So the same way someone that is a victim of domestic violence can apply for that status because they have been abused by their spouse, parent, or child, this will also apply to those people if they are the perpetrators and they have not and they have either been convicted of a domestic violence charge, or they have been found guilty of violating a restraining order. So those two things will automatically lead to you being deportable from the US. Now, and sometimes people ask what exactly is domestic violence charge, because most of the time when you're charged, you look at the document, you might not even know if it involves domestic violence or not. Now, in Massachusetts, we have assault and battery against a family or household member. That, if you're convicted, is a domestic violence offense because it's the household member or the family member. That is considered domestic violence. So if you are convicted of that charge, you are deportable. If you are convicted of violating a restraining order, you are also deportable. So I just want to put that out there. If there's anyone out there that fits into this and you want motivation, right, to stop the abuse, I hope this gives you some motivation to refrain from abusing household members. Okay. But most importantly, I just want to go back to talking about the victims, right? We really want to provide awareness and empowerment for the victims of domestic violence in order for them to be able to leave the abusive relationships. So if you are just joining us, please feel free to ask questions. Please feel free to share this video. I know for some people this might not apply to you, but it might apply to someone that you know or someone in your community that you might not even know is going through this, because this is not something, as immigrants, I'm from Nigeria, so I know we don't talk about these things. And, you know, it's really sad that, you know, the reason that I'm doing this video is to basically bring awareness to something that is so horrible. But the reason I'm doing this video is because of the discussion around the pastor that killed his wife in the United States, the Ghanaian pastor that killed his wife in the United States. And it's really important for us to have this discussion as immigrants. It's really important for us to empower each other and make sure that if we know someone that's in this situation, that we provide support and that we do not victim blame. That's something that I have seen some of, but mostly I have seen our communities coming together and really standing firmly against domestic violence. And I truly applaud that. And that's what led me to doing this video, because I want to make sure that as we are condemning domestic violence, we are also providing options for people that are in those situations, especially people that do not have legal status in the US. So this is, so that's why I say, if you are one of those people that condemn domestic violence, I would, just ask that you share this, because you never know that if someone in your community, in your sphere of influence, actually is going through that and just doesn't know how to get out of it, because they have this immigration thing holding them in that relationship. So again, this applies to spouses of US citizens, children under 21 and unmarried of US citizens, and parents of US citizens. So this is not just about what, spouses. This is also if your child is being abused by your husband or your wife, if you are being abused by your husband or your wife, and for parents, if your child is the one that's abusing you. And I know we don't talk about this, and it's something that is sometimes far removed, but we really need to start talking about the different forms of abuse that someone can face. And sometimes that abuse can come from your child. It could be, like I said, going back to the types of abuse, the verbal abuse, right? The intimidation, the economic, and the threats, right? To have you deported. I can just call ICE and you will be out of this country. That counts as abuse. There's no reason for you to have to deal with that as you are raising a child or building a family with your spouse, or as a child, that's under 21, dealing with this from a parent, right? So there are different forms of abuse, and I really want us to not only react when it is physical, we want to catch these abuses before it gets to the physical. And that's why I really encourage everyone to not only share this video, but talk about what you have learned with people that you know, because they might know someone that's going through this and need resources for that person to be able to relieve that relationship. So like I said, I'm really happy that we're talking about this. I'm really happy that this is a discussion that's happening in the immigrant community, but more specifically in the African immigrant community, because that's, you guys know, like I said, I'm Nigerian, so I am very in tune with the different discussions that are going on around this. And I have been very proud of my Africans for really standing firm against this. So let's see, I have a question. Is it an abuse when the undocumented did something wrong to call ICE? Well, it depends what the person did wrong, right? If the reason for, so basically it depends on the reason behind the actual calling of ICE, right? If it's a power, so we have like this power structure in relationship. So if it's a power move, it really depends on the relationship before that. Like I said, if it's a marital relationship, which you didn't mention, but if it's a marital relationship, for example, and the marriage for all intents and purposes was real, but the spouse, because of an argument or you know, a misstep by the undocumented person, calls ICE, that could be seen as a form of abuse because of the power structure and all of that in the relationship. But it really depends on the particular case and the particular situation, because we look at the entire relationship, not just that one act, right? So like I said, there's different types of abuse. And if someone, let's say, physically harms the other, clearly that's a clear, provable abuse. But when it's calling ICE, again, we would need to look at the entire relationship and just see if there's a pattern of behavior, if there's been threats previously to call ICE as a way to keep the undocumented person pacified in the relationship. So again, it's all about the power struggles in a relationship. And it really did, like I said, it's really individual on what counts as abuse and what doesn't. But in certain situations, yes, calling ICE on an undocumented person could be seen as an abuse, depending on your particular situation. And I just want to also add, because I've had people that come to me and ask, how do I get someone deported? So, oh, okay. Well, in order to apply, okay, so in order to apply under VAWA, and the relationship has to either be a married couple, a parent-child, or a parent-child relationship. So if a parent calls ICE on their child, that could be seen as a abuse, depending on the relationship. And then if in a married relationship, a spouse calls ICE on the other spouse. But if they do not have any familial relationship, I'm not sure, for the purposes of applying for benefits in the US, that would not really fit under VAWA. It could fit under other types of, it could fit under U visa, depending on what, if there's any prosecution of the person that calls ICE, if it's, if there's any charges filed against the person and all of that. But if it's not a familial relationship, then this wouldn't really lead to someone being able to gain status in the US. So thank you so much, Margaret, for your question. Again, if you are just joining us and you have questions, it can be about VAWA, and it could also be about anything immigration related. I am here to answer your questions, and I will do an overview again of who can apply for status, how, and what the timeline is. Because I know that's what people always want to know, is how long am I waiting, right? So spouses, parents, and unmarried children under 21 of US citizens can apply for status under VAWA if they can show that they are in a relationship, either parent-child relationship with the US citizen or spousal relationship with the US citizen. So if you can show that, and You can show that there was abuse. And like I said before, there's different levels of abuse. And we really need to talk about all of those, not just if there's physical violence. And I just want us to know it's not all about physical violence. We really want to help people before it gets to that level, right? So it could be emotional abuse, economic abuse. It could be threatening them to get them deported if they leave you. If they leave the relationship, I will call ICE and take away your child. So all those things are forms of abuse. And we need to talk about all of it, not just the physical abuse. And like I said before, I'm really proud of how people are reacting. And basically encouraging people in abusive relationships or that have faced domestic violence to seek help and to figure out ways to get out of those relationships. So this is one of the ways that you can encourage someone. So if one of their reasons for staying in the relationship is that they do not have status and their spouse has promised to file for them, but they are in danger physically or they are in danger mentally, it is better for them to seek alternatives like VAWA in order to gain status. Because again, VAWA does not require the abuser to be involved in any stage of the process. So that's something I really want people to understand. The abuser does not get to know that you filed for VAWA. They cannot call USCIS and find out if you filed for VAWA. This is between you, your lawyer, and USCIS. When there's an interview, it's you, your lawyer, and USCIS. Your abuser is nowhere in that equation. So this is something that I present to my clients that are coming to me just looking for options, right? They are in these relationships. They don't know where to start to even think about how to leave. And their immigration status is what's keeping them there because they are afraid that they will lose their child if they get deported. Their partner has threatened to take away their child. If you file for divorce, I'll take the child because you don't have status and you could be deported at any time. So those types of abuses really plagues the mind, and we want to recognize them and basically give people in those situations the option to leave the relationship with status or stay in the relationship. Like I said, VAWA does not require you to file for divorce. I've had clients that have lived in the house with their abuser because they were worried about their children, or they were worried about what would happen to them if they filed for divorce. So for them, it was better to file for VAWA while in that relationship. But for someone else, it might be better for them to leave that relationship and file for VAWA. It might be better for them to file for divorce as well. So if that's the situation, VAWA allows you to file for this either while you're living with your spouse and still in a valid marriage, or if you got divorced less than 2 years before filing. So those are the two ways that a spouse in an abusive relationship can actually file for VAWA. So it's either you're still married to the person or your divorce took place less than 2 years before you file. Yes. So Margaret says, I hope people don't abuse this filing process. It's hard to, like I said, every single process in immigration there are people out there that might try to abuse it, but the majority of people that apply for this truly are afraid to leave a relationship, truly are in an abusive relationship and is screened for. So that's why there's requirements for it. is that you have to be able to document the abuse in order to apply for this. So is there a possibility that people might abuse the filing process? Yes. But for me, the most important thing for me is someone that is being abused able to get out of that relationship? Yes. That's the most important thing for me, and that's my focus. I'm not focused on the people that are abusing the process. I'm focused on the people that actually need this process in order for it to either save their lives or for them to be able to start a new chapter in their lives. So thank you for that question, Margaret. And I hope I have the same hopes as well that people don't abuse the process. But the main thing is this process has been in place for several years. So since 1994, VAWA has been in place. It has, changed over the years to add more people that can apply for it. But again, it's been in place since 1994. There's only a specific office that handles VAWA for this area. So it's really important that they've set it up in a way that they know what they're looking for as far as they know what they're looking for when it comes to these relationships. And they, we as the attorneys try to make sure that we also screen our clients before applying, because we don't want to apply for someone that might not qualify for it. That's something we really work hard on as attorneys, is to make sure that to screen our clients to see what they could qualify for and how we can best help them. So if this is the best way for someone to get out of an abusive relationship, then that's what that's what it is. That's what we apply for them under. So, but yeah, there are requirements, and each requirement has to be documented. So we can say that the person is a US citizen or permanent resident, but you still have to show that the person is a US citizen or a permanent resident. And, I said before, if you can't show that, we can just ask USCIS, which is the government agency that handles these applications, to look through their records, because if the person wasn't born in the US, that government agency will be able to look through their records to see if they have granted that person citizenship or permanent residency. But the first part of this sentence is you have to prove a relationship, right? If you are married to the person, you have to show that your marriage is real. That's the number one. Before the abuse, right? Before you get to showing that you were abused in the relationship, you have to show that you entered into the marriage for the right reasons, right? But if it's a parent-child relationship, you just have to show that that parent-child relationship exists and that you lived with the person, right? That's another requirement, is that you must have lived with the abuser. So if you have never lived with your parent, if you have never lived with your child, you can't really file under this. So there's these requirements weed out the people that are just filing to see if they can get status, right? So it's really important that we make this known to people that do need it, that are going through abusive relationships. And if you're just joining us, please feel free to ask your questions in the comments. I will go through everything again for those just joining us. And okay, it's almost 7 o'clock, so we'll be going off soon. But I really want to encourage people, if you or someone you know wants to apply for VAWA or wants to see if you qualify for VAWA, please feel free to give us a call, because we can schedule you an appointment for October, because like I said, we're doing free consultations for victims of domestic violence in the month of October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So please feel free to give us a call and schedule that consultation for October. Okay, and feel free to share this with your community, because we really, our goal here is not just to put this information out there, but to actually help people to take advantage of this opportunity that could lead to them potentially leaving, having the courage to leave an abusive relationship. So it's really important that we talk about this as immigrants, and that we know that there's options available to people as well. Okay, so I'm just gonna quickly go over the VAWA and what it can do for someone that is undocumented in a relationship, a marital relationship, or a parent-child relationship with a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. So if you are a parent being abused by a child, you would need to be able to show that your child is a U.S. citizen. If your child is just a permanent resident, you would not be able to file under this. But if your child is a U.S. citizen, you can file under this. And again, the same requirements apply. You have to prove the relationship with the U.S. citizen or permanent resident. You have to show, if you are married to your abuser, you have to show that the abuse happened during the marriage, right? That the marriage is still valid or was terminated less than 2 years prior to you filing. That's really important because this makes it possible for you to remain married to the person while you're filing for this process, or to leave the person and file the process. So it really gives victims options and doesn't pigeonhole them into either filing for a divorce that could lead to potential further abuse as well. Let's see. So if you send for your spouse from different country and the person only spends 1 month and his wife abused him, later police involved, but restraint order for 5 years, what will come of the husband? So I think, so if the husband, I'm guessing the husband is the one that was sent for. I'm not really clear on who, what status the husband and the wife have. So if the wife is a U.S. citizen and abuses the husband, then that's the proper procedure. The police getting involved, potentially filing charges and restraining order, right? If the spouse is a permanent resident, right? If the wife is a permanent resident, then the consequences of that would be that they would have a hard time becoming a citizen, especially because citizenship looks at good moral character for 5 years before you file. So if the restraining order is there for 5 years, you're probably, the person will not be able to apply for citizenship for another 5 years, probably after that. So yeah, so if they are both U.S. citizens, if the husband, so it depends if the husband has status or not. So if the husband has status, right? So that's the main thing. If the husband has a green card, even if it's a temporary one, he does have options. There's options available because if you have a temporary green card, so if you have a conditional green card, you have to apply after 2 years to remove the condition. If that's the situation, which is what typically happens in these cases, is the person comes into the U.S., the abuse is happening, they have to file to remove the condition in 2 years, and now their spouse, they're getting a divorce, or they're no longer in a marital relationship what happens? Can you even file to remove the condition? And the thing is, yes, you can if you have been a victim of abuse in your marriage. Yeah. So if the person with the temporary green card was, from what you're saying, was a victim of abuse in the relationship, then VAWA allows for them to be able to apply on their own to remove the condition on the green card. So this not only applies to people that have, that don't have status. It applies to people with a conditional residency that are able to remove the condition with VAWA as the reason that the marriage is no longer um, no longer um, in place. Yes. Okay. Yes, the green card for 2 years is the conditional residency. So after 2 years of having it, you would have to apply to remove the condition. At that point, if you and your spouse are no longer married, you would have to apply with a waiver. And one of the waivers is the VAWA waiver that shows that you suffered abuse in your relationship, and that's why you are filing without your spouse. So again, that does not require you. So that's the good thing about VAWA. That does not require you to get divorced either. So if you're filing to remove the condition and you're still not divorced, well, if you file to remove the conditions under VAWA, you wouldn't have to, you're not forced to get divorced. Even though that's, I'm not, divorce is a waiver as well. But if you're filing specifically under VAWA, then you can remove the conditions based on the abuse. So I hope that answered your question. So thank you so much for asking the question. That was very helpful, and I hope it helps someone out there as well. So yeah, please feel free to contact me if you have questions or would like to schedule a consultation, because that's the best way for me to really look at your specific situation and give you kind of, an overview of what you could qualify for and start working on your case. Okay. So again, please feel free to ask your questions in the comments. And I will continue answering them as long as they keep coming in. We are a little over 7 o'clock, but I will keep going as long as you guys are still here and asking questions. Okay, so let's talk about good moral character, because that's one of the requirements of VAWA. So the person that's applying for VAWA has to have good moral character. This doesn't mean that you're an angel. That's not what this means. This means most of the time, this just means that you do not have a criminal record, right? When they run a background check, it comes out clean. That's what they're really talking about here. So the main thing to keep in mind, if you do have a criminal record, but everything else fits. So you were abused, you live with your, abuser, your marriage was real, all of those things. You have everything else, but you're afraid that you had a criminal record, so that might affect you being able to be approved. Please call us and schedule a consultation. Not every single conviction or every single arrest leads to a finding of bad moral character, right? It doesn't always have to fit into that. So please, especially if the arrest is in relationship to you being abused, right? So it's really important that you give us a call and we can help you. Another thing that fits under this that I just want to mention is if you entered the United States without authorization. So you did not come in with a visa, and the reason you didn't come in with a visa was based on the abuse. Your spouse forced you to come into the US, or they were going to divorce you, or something along those lines. You can get status under this if we can show that it was based on the abuse. You coming into the US was based on the abuse. Okay. So, I'm a permanent resident. How can't I'm guessing you're saying how can I file and for wife in Africa? So basically, as a permanent resident, depending on the country, I'm guessing from your name, probably Liberia. But depending on the country, you can file for a spouse wherever they are. It's just the timeline might be a little longer than if you were typically the timeline is longer than if you were a US citizen, but right now the timeline is practically the same. So you can, it's a similar process as if you were a US citizen at this point. However, I always tell people get the process started. Right now, most embassies, especially most African embassies, are still closed to interviews. So, but you want to get your application in so that when it reaches that stage, you can at least be in line instead of waiting for the embassies to open before you start the application process. So please feel free to call the office to schedule a consultation so that we can figure out the best way to help you. But is it possible for you to file for your spouse? Definitely it is. But we just want to, if you can give us a call and we can help you with that process. Because, if you follow our page, this is kind of what we do. Okay, we help people gain status and unify with their families in the US. So this is what we do. So feel free to give us a call. So as we're getting through this, I just want to go over the types of abuse one more time because, I want us to know it's not just physical abuse. Physical abuse is only one aspect of domestic violence, right? Typically before it gets to physical, in most situations, there's other things that's already happened, right? There's verbal abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's economic abuse, there's isolation from your family and friends, making you go to work and come back, right? You can't stop anywhere in between. You are monitored basically everywhere you're going. You have to check in, and not a normal, oh, I'm just going to let my husband or my wife know that I'm going here. It's more of a fear that if you don't let them know, you don't know what you're going to come home to. That's kind of what we're talking about here when it comes to, the monitoring. Using your immigration status against you. That's another big one, is especially in the immigrant community where one person doesn't have status. This is a huge thing that happens, is that if you um, do not have status, there's always this threat that abusers use, which is if you try to divorce me, I will take the kids because you don't have status and you can get deported. Well, I can tell you in family court, that's not necessarily the case in every single situation. Okay. But they use that as a way to intimidate their victim. And then the other one is if you try to leave me or if you keep doing, this thing that I told you not to do, I will call ICE. I will try to get you deported. You will never see the kids because you can't go with them. So those types of things are the types of abuse that we really want to focus on and talk about. The physical violence is obvious, right? It's obvious when someone gets hit that that's abuse. But we really want to open our minds that there's other forms of abuse that takes place in immigrant households and in households in general. But the threat of deportation is very specific to immigrant households or to someone that doesn't have an immigration status. So it's something to keep in mind, and we want to cover that as often as possible for those that are in abusive relationships. And okay. Is there any fees for consultation? Yes, we do have a fee for consultation, but when you call off office, we will be happy to schedule that with you. Like I said, I just want to cover again, if you are a victim of domestic violence and you want to schedule a consultation with us, we are offering a free consultation for the month of October in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So if you're calling us because you want to file for VAWA or you want to see if you qualify for VAWA, we would be giving you a free consultation under that. So please feel free to share that with your community. Like I said, we are offering free consultation to victims of domestic violence. I want to see if they qualify under VAWA or other abuse-related visas. So, and that's going to be for the month of October. So please call and schedule the consultation now before it fills up. So yeah, let's see. And then lastly, if there's no questions coming in, I will end the live, but please do ask your questions. And if you're watching this on the replay, thank you for watching, and please feel free to leave your questions in the comments. I will get to them as I go along. So please do not feel that you can't leave a question because you're watching this at a later time. Okay, so let's talk about consequences to the abuser, because we want to deter people, our fellow immigrants. We want to deter you from being an abuser. So the first consequence is, of course, potentially having a conviction of violent conviction. So if you are charged with assault and battery on a family member, that's a domestic violence conviction right there. If you are convicted, you would have if you are convicted of that, you would then have other consequences like jail time to look at for that. If you are not a US citizen and you're a permanent resident and you are the abuser and there has been charges filed against you, or there has been a restraining order against you, that is going to come up when you go to apply for citizenship, because citizenship looks at good moral character for the 5 years before you file. So if within that 5 years you have a conviction for assault and battery on a family member, or you just have a charge on there, if you have restraining orders, the officer has the discretion to decide that they are going to basically not approve your case because they looked at your record and they see that you have all these charges for domestic violence issues. On the other side, if you get convicted of a domestic violence charge, like assault and battery on a family member or household member, you are deportable. ICE can put you in removal proceedings. ICE can put you in immigration court to try to get you deported. So that's something to keep in mind. If you have a restraining order against you, and this applies to anyone, not just, this applies to if you are not a US citizen, if you're an immigrant and you're not a US citizen, and you have a restraining order against you, and you violate the restraining order, right? You are deportable. It means that ICE will go through the process to try to deport you from the US. So we just want to make sure, it's clear that having a restraining order against you doesn't make you deportable. It will make it hard for you to get your citizenship, but it doesn't make you deportable. Violating the restraining order makes the person deportable. So we really want to not only talk about what immigration benefits people can get, but we also want to deter abusers from abusing their victims. So if you are not a US citizen, here's the consequences. So please, let's again share this. We want to make sure that we are showing this to people and we are making it clear to them that this is definitely something that is beneficial to victims, and that we want to deter people from being abusers as well. So please, if you are just joining us, feel free to leave me a question in the comments so that I can respond to your questions live. Like I said, I do offer, you can call my office to schedule a consultation. And I did put my email in the comments on Facebook, so that you can send me an email as well if you want to schedule a consultation. So, or you can just send me a message on Facebook if you're already there. Okay. So feel free to do that as well, and we will get you scheduled for that consultation. So if there are no other questions, I'm going to just remind everyone that we are offering free consultations for victims of domestic violence that want to basically meet with us to see if they qualify under VAWA or other visa options. And we would be offering the free consultation for the month of October. So if you schedule your appointment for the month of October, then we can help you by giving you a free consultation. And October, for those that don't know, is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So we really want to make sure that we are offering this opportunity for people to basically get this service. Let's see. So Ikue asks, so after police court and ended up in shelter, but you don't want to divorce because of the kids, will you lose your benefits? No. So VAWA does not require the victim to get a divorce. It really doesn't require that. If you are able to show that you were in a marital relationship, even if you did get divorced, but the main thing is showing that you are in a marital relationship with a person and you suffered abuse during that marriage. But please, if you want more individual analysis of your particular situation, feel free to give us a call and we can schedule that consultation for you or the person that you're asking the question for. Okay. So yes, VAWA does not require you to get divorced. You will not lose the ability to apply for VAWA if you are not divorced. So most of the time, like I said, the VAWA is set up to really help victims of domestic violence, right? And we know as people that have worked with individuals that are victims of domestic violence that when the person threatens to leave the relationship, that's when the abuser can get physically violent and even deadly. So we really, this act really makes it possible for the person to remain in the relationship, even if it's just remaining married and not getting a divorce, in order to protect the person. Sometimes that's the best thing for the person's protection, is to remain and get status and then figure out a way to get out. But the way it's set up, you do not have to get divorced in order to apply under this. Okay. So like I said, feel free to ask your questions. I will continue to answer them. Yeah, I will continue to answer them till 8 o'clock. Actually, what time is it? Oh, till 7:30, guys. You don't have to stay with me for that long. So we're gonna go till 7:30. If you have questions, please feel free to ask them, and I will be answering them live right now. Um, and let's see. I just want to cover again. I'm going to keep stressing this. If you have been with me from the beginning, you know why I am stressing this. The types of abuse does not have to be physical violence only. Let's let's open our minds that there's other types of violence, there's other things that are not on the surface that people can be going through that we can really help them with. So types of abuse that happens, and sometimes if you are the one going through it, you don't even know that it's abuse, right? You don't even know that it's categorized as abuse. You know how you feel when it happens, but you don't accept or think that it's abuse. So there's verbal abuse, there's degradation, there's emotional abuse, right? There's economic abuse. And recently, something that's not on here that has really gained, um, you know, over the past few years is digital abuse. So that's when the spouse or the parent or the child uses technology to basically as a form of abuse, right? They take your phone, they check everything, your who you called, how long you talked on the phone. They monitor every single thing you do online, every single thing you do on your phone, as a way to control you, right? So there's that aspect. There's people that should just show their spouse their phones, out of, oh, that's my spouse, it's okay. But then there's people that feel that they have to, or else it will cause an issue in their relationship. So it might be just something that causes an issue, right? You're having marital problems, but that problems can rise to the level of abuse under VAWA. So you might not think it's abuse, but still, if you're having marital problems, that could fall under economic abuse, where you work and the money goes into a specific account that your husband or your wife controls. You have no access to it. When you need to use the money that you worked for, you would have to ask permission. That's a form of abuse. So I really want us to talk about this. I will be doing more videos just talking about, so if you follow my page, if you don't already, you should, because we talk about immigration law on there. So I'll be doing more videos talking about the types of abuse, the people that can qualify under VAWA, and how relationship problems, so marital problems, parent-child relationship problems can fit under this. So we really want to empower people and continue the conversation about domestic violence and how we, the African immigrants, and we, the immigrants in general, are opposed to any form of domestic violence. Okay, so like I said, I will be doing more videos even into the month of October, because again, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we will be offering free consultations for individuals that want to see if they qualify under VAWA because they have been victims of abuse, either from a spouse or a parent or a child. So please feel free to give us a call, and we will schedule that consultation for you in the month of October. So you can give us a call now so that we can schedule it for October. I really want people to take advantage of this before our calendar fills up. So again, feel free to share that with your community, and we will continue working on basically empowering people that have been in an abusive relationship. So I want to thank you guys so much for sticking in there with me. If you have any questions, even after this video is over, feel free to leave a comment. If you're watching in the replay, thank you for watching, and feel free to leave your comment as well, and I will get to them later. If you have found this video helpful at all, or if you know someone that would find it helpful, please feel free to share it with your community, because we really want to get this message out there that victims of domestic violence that do not have status in the US have options. And we want to be able to basically empower people to take charge of their lives and not rely on their abusive partner in order to gain status in the US. So again, thank you so much for sticking in there with me, and continue to put your questions in the comment, and I will respond in there. As a child of so for this question, please feel free. It says, Mai came to the US as a child. Unfortunately, she lost all her documents. If she filed anything with USCIS or the immigration, any part of the US government, there is freedom of oh my goodness, guys, it's been a long day. The Freedom of Information Act, which allows you to request certain information about yourself from the US government, depending on the department that is aware of the person. So feel free to, again, give us a call, and we can certainly help you locate those documents. Okay, so thank you guys once again, and have a great night and a great rest of your week. Okay, let's finish up September. It's almost over, but let's finish up September strong. Okay, thank you, and have a great night, everyone.